soldiers, bare-faced chic, 'cause beauty is skin deep.
Last time those girls met,
Do you know what happens when you're pregnant?
now they're the best of chums.
I want to see one stretch mark.
As Ruby opens her tuck box
I just want to stuff her until she's fat.
before bunking off to the shops,
Anything you want up to $20.
a class reunion for Ruby Wax and Pamela Anderson. Tonight at 10:10 on BBC1.
Who's more attractive, me or her? I'm more attractive. Well, there you go.
You know, that's cute.
Society today is making ever greater strides to get mothers back to work. From nursery care to children's hotels. But what if by going to work you were damaging your children's education? What then?
We found that when mothers were working, children were doing less well in school.
Research is discovering the effect that full-time working can have on your child when it needs you most.
Mothers are key figures for education too.
Missing Mum, Panorama, tonight 9:30 BBC1.
The Brittas Empire is in turmoil here on BBC1 with a squashed frog and a large hole adding to the chaos in half an hour. First Phil is waking up to reality in Albert Square. The birthday package holds many troubled returns for the Brittas Empire on BBC1 next. Over on BBC2, Glasgow meets Oxford for University Challenge.
The clock is ticking for Ali McCoist.
Which striker scored goals in 2 English FA Cup finals during the 90s, but with different clubs?
Oh, come on, what are you looking at? My boy goes to school in 2 years. I want to go.
A question of sport. Answers in by Friday, 8:30.
And don't forget to turn your TV sets off.
A beauty contest.
competition in Ballykiss Angel.
The last time I saw legs like that, they were hanging from a nest.
Friends.
These kind of complications always end up ruining friendships.
Lovers.
Oh, Brenton.
Sometimes it can't be helped.
Advice.
You really should get help, you know.
Oh, yes. Bar staff or therapy.
Troubled times.
I'm trying or something.
Ballykiss Angel, Sunday at 8 on BBC1.
There's a feature on the real-life setting for Ballykiss Angel in the new issue of Radio Times, which also contains listings for all television and major satellite channels. A romantic weekend in Paris must be one on BBC1 now. All employees at Whitby Leisure Centre are eligible.
On Wednesday in Commoners' Muck.
If they were out with us, you'd tell me.
You don't fancy going out, do you?
Sorry to barge in.
I want me money.
Strengths and a big body, Roberts. I can blow the lid on the whole thing.
They'll take advantage of, that's all.
What's going to happen?
Cancel the war, John. They kick one of us, they kick us all.
Commoners' Muck goes to the dogs. Wednesday at 9:30 on BBC1.
A woman with everything is in danger of losing it all as a secret alcoholic. My name is Kate, the film on BBC2 now.
Society today is making ever greater strides to get mothers back to work. From nursery care to children's hotels. But what if by going to work you're damaging your children's education? What then?
We found that when mothers were working, children were doing less well in school.
Research is discovering the effect that full-time working can have on your child when it needs you most.
Mothers are key figures for education too.
Missing Mum, Panorama, in half an hour.
Now at 9 o'clock, the main evening news on BBC1 with Peter Sissons.
After more clashes in Belgrade, Serbia's opposition hardens its resistance to the regime of Slobodan Milosevic. They accuse his security police of bringing terror to the streets and call on the army to intervene. British football says there'll be no surrender to UEFA's campaign to stage the World Cup in Germany. And the stepfather of the missing 9-year-old Zoe Evans was tonight charged with her murder. Good evening. Under pressure from mass rallies within and fierce criticism from the West, the security police of Serbia's besieged president have again been battling with demonstrators demanding democratic reform. Violent scenes last night and further clashes today were followed by an appeal from the opposition leader for a general strike and for the army to step in, as he put it, to stop the crime that is being committed on the streets of Belgrade. The protests, which have been largely peaceful, have escalated over the last 3 months since President Milosevic annulled opposition victories in local elections. Our correspondent Orla Guerin is in the Serbian capital.
The daily pro-democracy rally in central Belgrade and the message, business as usual. The police presence was heavy. The march had been banned by the authorities. It was peaceful for the most part, but at the end, tension flared. The demonstrators, who remained, threw stones, and police with riot shields forced them off the streets. There were some injuries on both sides and a number of arrests, but this was not an action replay of last night's violence. That crackdown was the biggest show of strength by the state so far. It came as a shock after almost 80 days of mainly peaceful protests. Last night, Belgrade was a battleground, with police using tear gas, water cannon and clubs against demonstrators. The casualty list was high. The immediate outcome, a chorus of international condemnation. The opposition say the strong-arm tactics backfired. This is a new scenario, and at a news conference today, opposition leaders were mapping out their way forward. As well as peaceful protest, there must be civil disobedience, and now a national strike.
I expect all schools, universities, workers, public transportation to go on strike, all the people who value their dignity.
While the opposition was meeting the press, the Serbian president was meeting senior police officers, officially passing on his thanks for their work against alleged terrorists in Kosovo. But most here believe the agenda was longer than that. It's too soon to say if the recent violence will mark a turning point here. For now, it's unclear what the authorities plan to do next. Some in the opposition insist President Milosevic is running out of time. Others fear the introduction of direct rule could be just around the corner. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Belgrade.
President Milosevic has run Serbia for almost a decade, but questions are now being asked about how long he can hold power. In recent weeks, the opposition has won over the Orthodox Church, and the army has said it won't intervene against the protesters. In a special report for the 9 o'clock news, our Foreign Affairs correspondent Ben Brown has been to Slobodan Milosevic's hometown of Požarevac and found that criticism of his rule was not confined to Belgrade.
He still looks comfortable in power, but Slobodan Milosevic has seen his support start to ebb away from key institutions like the church and the army, and from many of his people. Even here in his hometown of Požarevac, where he was born and bred, discontent is stirring. He's a man of the past, this woman says. He doesn't know what he's doing. I shouldn't say it coming from this town, another shopper told me, but things are terrible and it's Milosevic's fault. Only a few people in Požarevac actually dare demonstrate against Mr. Milosevic in the town where he still spends his weekends and where many of his henchmen and ministers come from. But the daily protests, however small, are a humiliation for the president. Even here in his hometown, where Mr. Milosevic used to be hailed as a hero, many people now simply hate him. The long years of economic crisis, fruitless warfare and fiddled election results are finally taking their toll on his popularity. The town of Požarevac is where President Milosevic first met his wife, Mirjana, often seen as the sinister power behind his throne, a Lady Macbeth. Confidential minutes of a recent meeting show she demanded that riot police crack down hard on the demonstrators. The ruling couple are increasingly isolated, according to their opponents.
He is completely alone with his wife. Now we can see him as an enemy of our state and of our people, because he doesn't care about people, about state. He cares only about his position and his power.
President Milosevic has been reduced to busing his supporters into Belgrade. Many industrial and rural workers do still back him, and he's propped up by his faithful riot police. But where he was once invincible, he now looks vulnerable. His opponents carry very different images of the president. Some of them predict his downfall within the year, but he is the great survivor, who's already changed from warmonger to peacemaker. To stay in office, he may now have to change from dictator to democrat. Ben Brown, BBC News, Serbia.
The Football Association said it's confident England can win the right to stage the World Cup in 2006, despite a row with the sport's European governing body UEFA, who've given their support to Germany. But after winning the renewed backing of the government, the FA believes this is one match against the Germans that England can win. Duncan Kennedy reports.
The sense of national excitement generated by Euro 96 may have been the stuff of legend, but football officials and politicians know it will take more than the spirit of St. George to slay UEFA into submission. In a series of meetings today, the Football Association met government officials to discuss ways of countering the German World Cup bid. That resulted in the prospect of lottery money to pay for the English campaign and prime ministerial support for the attempt.
We were always aware that it was important this was a national bid, supported by the whole country. If the government of the day and the opposition are backing them on this, feels that money should be spent in that way, that's good enough for us.
Not even the Germans doubt England's ability to stage World Cup 2006. The new Wembley Stadium will be better than anything they currently have. But the Germans, who put England out of Euro 96, insist that as they put their bid in 4 years ago and won the support of UEFA, they should carry the torch for Europe.
We announced the bid so early with the idea to make our German bid to a European one. Europe should speak with only one voice in that bid campaign.
It's not the first time a continent has ended up speaking with two voices. Japan and South Korea fought a stadium-sized battle to host the 2002 tournament, an effort believed to have cost $1 billion. The world governing organisation, FIFA, doesn't want that again, but neither does it want UEFA and Germany believing Europe's choice has been made either.
The decision is taken by the 24 individual members of the FIFA Executive Committee, who represent all 6 continents of the world, and never before have we had any continent coming in for one or the other candidate, and it's unlikely to be the case this time either.
It's by no means certain any European team will win the right to stage the World Cup in 9 years' time. But that hasn't stopped the belief among English fans that Euro 96 was a reminder of World Cup 66 and a taster for 2006. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
There are growing indications that Pakistan's former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif of the Muslim League is likely to win today's general election. It was called after the dismissal of Benazir Bhutto's government for alleged corruption. The head of the Commonwealth team monitoring the vote said the low turnout made it clear that public respect for political parties had plummeted. From Islamabad, our South Asia correspondent Mike Wooldridge reports.
As the first official results started to flow in, at the headquarters of Nawaz Sharif's Pakistan Muslim League, there was ever-increasing confidence that they'd secured an outright win.
Because it is far more than our expectations. We were expecting less than 100, and now it seems to be well beyond 100.
And you're sure we will be able to form the next government?
There's no doubt anymore.
As Nawaz Sharif cast his own vote earlier in the day, he denied there'd been any deal with President Laghari to bring about a victory for his party. Benazir Bhutto, voting in her hometown, thinks otherwise and has repeatedly claimed the election was being rigged. Imran Khan ended up not casting his own vote, and with his justice movement's electoral impact still much in doubt. In the tribal areas, such as this region around the Khyber Pass, there was enthusiastic voting. People living here had all been given the right to vote for the first time in Pakistan's history. But in much of the rest of the country, there was often no more than a trickle of voters through the polling stations. It was declared by the influential Commonwealth Observer Group to have been a largely peaceful election, with procedural faults, though not on a scale that would be likely to affect the outcome. But the group had this warning about the health of democracy in Pakistan.
This low vote should be taken as a very significant warning by all the political parties, because unless Pakistan's political culture changes, I believe the future of Pakistan's democracy will be very much in doubt.
What many Pakistanis ask themselves is how soon they might have to face yet another election day, given the frequency with which civilian governments have been dismissed. The celebratory atmosphere in the Nawaz Sharif camp is growing by the hour. But the outspoken warning by the Commonwealth mission was meant to be a salutary reminder to those who will now lead Pakistan that they would ignore the public mood at their peril. Mike Wooldridge, BBC News, Islamabad.
The Foreign Secretary, Malcolm Rifkind, has called for an end to demands for the closer integration of European countries. Speaking in Sweden, he said the European Union must not develop into a federal superstate. Mr. Rifkind's comments came as the French Prime Minister, on a visit to London, said he's convinced the European single currency will go ahead as planned in 2 years' time. Our political editor, Robin Oakley, reports.
Mr. Rifkind was in Sweden today on the first leg of a European tour, challenging enthusiasts for greater integration to say just how far they want to take it towards a federalist United States of Europe. A challenge designed not only to concentrate the minds of European leaders, but to reassure voters back home that the Tories are best equipped to continue the fight against federalism.
We want the decisions to be taken freely by our own government, the laws to be enacted by our own parliament, and the implementation of the laws to be monitored by our own courts.
In London, French and British Prime Ministers, in the most amiable style, proved at odds on almost every European question, from social legislation to the single currency.
We also think that it would be in the interest of all our partners, and especially of Great Britain, to join us. But I think that John Major has many reasons to explain this better than I do. But I wish that either in the first wave or in the second wave, Great Britain will join us.
We're not absolutely certain that it will be ready for 1999, and there is a difference of view between our European partners and us upon that, about whether the convergence criteria will be clearly sustainable at that particular date.
Labour's meanwhile seeking to indicate, without risking any accusation that it's soft on Europe, that it's keeping its options more genuinely open on the single currency.
Labour has said quite clearly that our decision to join the single currency will be based on a hard-headed assessment of the economic realities. In the long run, any government of Britain is going to have to reassess whether or not Britain can continue to stay out if the single currency goes ahead and if it is successful. Those are very big qualifications.
Liberal Democrats remain convinced Britain should join.
The best interests of the people of Britain lie in our economic and political integration within Europe. That is why we believe Britain should enter the single European currency, provided the Maastricht criteria have been achieved and Britain itself has achieved these criteria.
Europe today dominated a campaign which is certainly enriching the advertising industry. But the big beasts of the domestic political jungle focused too on the Wirral South by-election, called today for February the 27th. Mr. Heseltine's admission voters might still be in a mood to kick the Tories was greeted by John Prescott as surrender before the battle had begun. The Wirral contest will be crucial to party morale in the general election run-up. Labour hopes to capture a traditional Conservative seat on protest votes. The Tories hope their former supporters will come home, treating it as the start of the bigger contest to come. With so much at stake, much expectation management is going on. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Westminster.
In the last half hour, the stepfather of the missing 9-year-old Zoe Evans has been charged with her murder. Wiltshire police said he would appear before magistrates tomorrow.
Detectives working from their incident room in Warminster arrested Miles Evans at lunchtime. After Zoe's disappearance, he and his wife appeared at a news conference together appealing for help. 2 weeks ago, they were both arrested and then released after questioning. 9-year-old Zoe went missing on January the 11th. For days after her disappearance, police officers were joined by hundreds of members of the public and soldiers based in this garrison town in the search for the missing youngster. But despite the scale of the operation, detectives working on what became a murder inquiry have failed to find her body. Over the past weeks, there has been no let-up in the police search. Tonight, detectives said that Miles Evans, who's a private in the army, would appear before magistrates in Trowbridge in the morning, charged with the murder of his stepdaughter. June Kelly, BBC News.
The main unionist newspaper in Northern Ireland has joined calls for the government to apologise to the victims of Bloody Sunday, who were killed when soldiers opened fire on a civil rights demonstration in 1972. A day after yesterday's mass rally marking the shootings in Londonderry, an editorial in the newsletter says the troops were guilty of an appalling overreaction and the relatives of those who died deserve a heartfelt, unambiguous apology. A Malaysian businessman has told Winchester Crown Court that he received information from the footballers Bruce Grobbelaar, Hans Segers and John Fashanu. But Heng Swan Lim said the tips were for friends and he'd done nothing illegal. All 4 men deny trying to fix the result of football matches. The Department of Health has said there's been no change in the number of cases of the new variant of CJD, the human equivalent of mad cow disease. But scientists say that it's too early to say how many people could be affected in the long term. 6 British nuclear fuel workers have been contaminated by radioactive dust at Sellafield in Cumbria. They were working inside a Magnox reprocessing plant. All 6 have been allowed home after medical checks.
The accident happened in one of 2 reprocessing plants at Sellafield, the Magnox plant, which is currently being refurbished. The alarm was raised when particles of radioactive dust set off monitors in the building, which was immediately evacuated. 6 people who were dismantling a machine were contaminated. This evening, British Nuclear Fuels confirmed the accident happened at 9:15 last night and said it will be re-evaluating safety at the plant as a result.
This was a very rare occurrence. The people affected were working in the reprocessing plant. They heard the alarms go off. They went to our site medical centre. They were slightly contaminated with radioactive dust. They were cleaned off and subsequently went home. This is a very rare occurrence.
Those contaminated won't be allowed back into radioactive parts of the building for several weeks and will continue to be monitored. They had been wearing masks to prevent inhalation, but radioactive particles which had contaminated their clothes reached their skin when they undressed. On the internationally agreed scale of nuclear incidents, which ranges from 0 to 7, this rate's a 2, though some believe that could change.
Normally what happens when we see incidents like this, they're reported at the very lowest scale possible. And then we find 1 or 2 months later, when the incident has been fully investigated and the Board of Investigation reports, the incident usually notches up a scale or 2.
The last known radioactive leak here was 4 years ago. The BBC learned of this latest incident when a Department of the Environment fax went astray. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News.
More than 400 people demonstrated today outside a meeting of Scotland's MPs, the so-called Scottish Grand Committee, in the Borders town of Selkirk. The protesters feared that cuts in local education budgets could lead to school closures and the loss of hundreds of teachers' jobs. Our Scotland correspondent Colin Blaine reports.
A community up in arms about education. This demonstration in the Borders town of Selkirk is an ambush for the Scottish Grand Committee. All Scotland's MPs conducting Scottish business around the country. It's a standoff between local and central government. Scotland's councils say they're still meeting the costs of last year's massive reorganisation. In the Borders, savage education cuts are threatened.
The kids are not going to get the chance to do everything that other people all over the country are going to get to do. Music lessons, PE lessons, it's just crazy.
It's our children's lives they're playing with, as we all know. It just can't be tolerated, and the more of us turn out, the better.
They're threatening to take our pool away from us, our library, our books.
just everything down to pencils.
Underscoring what's at stake, musicians from Selkirk High School give an open-air performance for MPs. They fear their orchestra could be at risk.
The blame for what is happening to Scottish education and to this part of the world lies firmly with the government who've underfunded their own reorganisation. And this government still has time. If it can find money for a new royal yacht, then let it turn its attention to the needs of Scotland's education system.
I think, frankly, to have kids coming out in the cold pleading for their music tuition is an absolute disgrace, and the people who are playing politics with children should cease forthwith.
Michael Forsyth is accustomed to playing a different tune from the local authorities. The Tories don't control a single Scottish council.
Oh, yeah, I've forgotten how to do it.
And I don't know what's more foolish, Michael Forsyth believing he could lay the responsibility on Scottish councils, or the Labour Party aping the spending plans of the Tories, as we saw from the crowd today. Both Labour and Tory are in deep trouble in cutting at Scottish education.
It's been long-standing Liberal Democrat policy that if it was necessary to put a penny on income tax to fund necessary investment in education, we would do that. I think it's quite clear that that is necessary, and that's a very clear commitment from us. No other party is brave enough to make that commitment.
Inside the Grand Committee, there were claims that the government was sucking the lifeblood out of Scottish education. But the Conservatives said they'd brought choice and stability to the system.
A protest like this in a quiet borders town is a measure of local concern about the future of schools in the area. Education remains one of the most sensitive political issues in Scotland. Colin Blaine, BBC News, Selkirk.
President Clinton is preparing for his annual State of the Union speech this week, in which he'll spell out the priorities for his second term of office. A year ago, he declared an end to the era of big government and state interference. But as Bridget Kendall reports for the 9 o'clock news, 12 months on, attitudes towards government have changed dramatically.
You can't get much further from Washington than the mountains of California. And it's here, out west, that resentment against America's government is greatest. The Roney family have been here for generations. They say taxes and laws are now so crippling, cattle ranching has become almost impossible. Even where the cows graze is restricted, environmental laws have declared these meadow pools the habitat of a rare shrimp that must be protected.
And I had no idea that the government would fly over you in their helicopters and watch what's going on, or that they could tell you that you couldn't do things on your land, or that they would vilify you or work with environmental groups to vilify you. I hate that part.
For many Americans, the government they prefer is at state level. Wherever you are in California, you can still get to the capital in Sacramento to lobby local officials in person. But the federal government in Washington seems out of touch and far too large in comparison. It costs resentful American taxpayers $1.5 trillion to pay for the tax collectors, law enforcement officers and other bureaucrats. In all, nearly 6 million employees. And it was this public hostility Republicans counted on when they shut down the government a year ago. But that shutdown didn't just bring Washington to a standstill. The impact was felt across the country, including national parks like Yosemite in California, a popular holiday destination, but also a symbol of America's national heritage, owned by the people, but run for them by the government. And it was when Americans were reminded their federal government was needed to pay for their favourite national parks that public opinion began to change. All of a sudden, a government that protected the unspoilt beauty spots ordinary Americans are so proud of seemed a government worth supporting. A mood swing President Clinton has been quick to catch on to, using the Grand Canyon as a backdrop. He even proclaimed during his re-election campaign he was extending government control of the land through a new national park.
Sometimes we must measure progress in protecting frontiers for our children and all children to come.
A series of natural disasters has reinforced this new sympathy for government. Massive floods swept through California at the new year. In Yosemite Park, they caused millions of dollars in damage. Whole roads were obliterated, and many people realized only the federal government had the money and the manpower to react quickly to this scale of emergency. For many of those hit by floods, federal emergency aid has been a revelation. Glenn Miller's home was devastated by a nearby river, but he was swiftly given federal money to pay for workmen to clean up the mess. Once sceptical of big government, Glenn now says he realizes it can be a force for good.
I used to think that when I paid my taxes, I never saw any of it come back to me.
but I didn't realize there was a big pot of money that was there for disasters. And now being in the middle of one, it's pretty obvious how quickly funds are dispersed to help people.
But as President Clinton weighs the mood across the country ahead of his State of the Union address, he has to tread carefully. While many may applaud sweeping initiatives, plenty of other Americans still see his federal government as the main restriction on their freedom. Bridget Kendall, BBC News, California.
The first bus in Britain, which can run on both diesel and electricity, has gone into service in Portsmouth. It uses battery power while in the city centre to keep it pollution-free, but switches to diesel for out-of-town journeys. Our Southern Transport correspondent Paul Clifton reports.
Outside the city centre, it's as noisy and smelly as any other diesel bus. At the flick of a switch, the battery takes over. But it does sound like a turbocharged milk float. In the suburbs, the diesel is switched on, and that recharges the batteries at the same time.
A lot of local authorities are becoming extremely concerned about the amount of pollution in city centres. They don't want to completely re-engineer the vehicles they're using, but they do have this problem, and they're going to be pushed out of city centres unless they can find a solution like a hybrid vehicle.
Exhaust emissions are claimed to be 25% lower overall than a typical bus. But critically, it's completely pollution-free in the city centre, where the pollution problem is most acute.
I hope that there's a good compromise available whilst we're still waiting for the electric batteries to be developed to give you a truly electric service.
Small batteries can't store enough energy to keep going on most bus routes for a whole day. So there's a great deal of interest in this hybrid diesel-electric vehicle. Mercedes-Benz are watching the 3-year trial, so too are bus operators and other local authorities. The bus industry is leading the way with new fuels. Biodiesel made from oilseed rape and smelling of frying chips has been tried. Natural gas is more successful, and the more refined city diesel is becoming widely available.
We must do all we can to get these emissions down. And
the hybrid bus was unveiled in Portsmouth by the Transport Secretary, Sir George Young. It may be quieter, but strange noise it makes certainly turns a few heads. Paul Clifton, BBC News, Portsmouth.
And the main news tonight, after more clashes in Belgrade, Serbia's opposition has hardened its resistance to the regime of Slobodan Milosevic. They accuse his security police of bringing terror to the streets. And the stepfather of the missing 9-year-old Zoe Evans was tonight charged with her murder. Newsnight is on BBC 2 at 10:30. That's the 9 o'clock news. Good night.
In 1994, Megan Kanker was murdered by a convicted paedophile.
I can't believe that he did what he did to her.
Her mother wants to tell the world.
I don't want to see this happen to any one of your children. I want you to scare your children. I want you to tell them.
And if a paedophile moves into your street...
I'm getting out, and I'm coming to live in your neighborhood.
She thinks you should know.
If I knew that they were on my street, my daughter would be here today.
The fight for Megan's law. Inside Story. Tomorrow at 10 on BBC1.
Good evening from the Look North newsroom. The main stories tonight. An inquest in Hull has been hearing how a patient died when he was given the wrong type of blood following an operation. Norman Lyons died from massive kidney and bowel failure after the mix-up at Castle Hill Hospital. The inquest was told that the blood was destined for a patient in the next bed. Paul Murphy reports.
Norman Lyons' elderly widow arrived at Hull Coroner's Court, anxious to hear the precise circumstances of her husband's death last June. 73-year-old Mr. Lyons was admitted to Castle Hill Hospital near Hull for major heart surgery. Dr. John Clark, who conducted the post-mortem, told the inquest that shortly after surgery, Mr. Lyons was given blood type A positive instead of O positive. The mistake, he said, caused acute kidney and bowel failure. Consultants from Castle Hill Hospital who operated on Mr. Lyons claimed that the mix-up was not fully responsible for his death, but had contributed to it. The inquest heard evidence from nursing staff on the intensive care unit, where Norman Lynes received his transfusion following surgery. The inquest, which is expected to last for a further 2 days, will continue tomorrow.
4 firefighters have been injured in an explosion in Sheffield. They were hurt when a shop selling car parts exploded. A number of youths are being questioned by police. As soon as the firefighters broke into the shop, an explosion ripped through the building. The neighbouring butcher's shop was also damaged. 3 of the injured are still in hospital, suffering from a range of broken bones, cuts and bruises. Fire investigators say it could have been an accident, but they've not ruled out arson. A man will go on trial next month charged with murdering a pensioner from East Yorkshire. Derek Christian is accused of killing Margaret Wilson, who was 66 when she died almost 2 years ago. Mrs. Wilson's body was found on a country road near her home in Burton Fleming near Bridlington. She'd been stabbed to death. One of the largest studies ever to be carried out on pubs is warning that without urgent help, the local could soon become a thing of the past. The Rural Development Commission wants to know why so many pubs are failing and what can be done to turn them around. In a little store behind her pub, Eileen Slater runs a tiny shop for the villagers of Nether Poppleton. It's an example of diversification that could ensure the survival of village pubs in the future.
I think they're quite pleased with this. They come in and we can have a little talk as well. And it's quite slow. It has been slow to begin with, but things are picking up.
It's already too late to save some pubs from closure, but the Rural Development Commission wants to stop the decline and is investigating ways to save village pubs and safeguard their role in the heart of the community. That's all from us tonight. We'll be back tomorrow evening with Look North at 6:30. I very much hope you can join us all then. For more of us here, a very good night.
Good evening. Rain and gales have been driving in across the country from the northwest through the day. In fact, bringing the wettest of the weather to the southern uplands of Scotland, around 3/4 of an inch of rain at Eskdale Muir. But drier weather already following in from the north and clearer weather too. You can see on the satellite picture there's a distinct back edge to this line of cloud that is the weather front. Those weather fronts, in fact, making further progress southwards through the night. Ahead of them, a strong or gale force southwesterly wind, and also they'll bring southwards the cloudy and the wet weather as well. But clearing skies are likely over Northern Ireland and much of Scotland, so it's here, particularly in central Scotland, that we may well have some regions of frost and ice later in the night. Further south, the temperatures will hold, or in fact even rise through towards tomorrow morning. As far as the weather map's concerned for Tuesday, well, this weather front will still be hanging around close in towards the south of the country, whereas further north it'll be a totally different tale from today. There will be a few showers for a time in the far north of Scotland, but many parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland will be fairly dry and bright with sunny spells throughout the day. And the cloud and rain over northern England will for the most part clear away during the morning to leave some brightness as well. Further south, it's going to be dull and wet. There'll be some quite heavy spells of rain coming and going throughout the day. And later on, towards the end of the afternoon, we'll see strengthening southwesterly winds pushing the heavy rain back northwards. In time, probably for the evening, we'll see some rain arriving in Northern Ireland and Northern England again by then. Well, despite the cloud and the rain, it's the south that will see the mildest weather again, around 10 Celsius in places. Despite the sunshine in the north, it will be cooler, particularly in parts of Scotland. As the rain continues its northwards push, we'll see some snow over the high ground of Scotland in particular through into Wednesday, but dry and somewhat brighter weather will come in to replace this from the west during the day. And then it's all change again by Thursday, a big weather system by the look of it, powering in, bringing most of the rain to the north and the west.
Last time those girls met...
You know what happens when you're pregnant.
Now they're the best of chums.
I want to see one stretch mark.
As Ruby opens her tuck box...
I just want to stuff her until she's fat.
Before bunking off to the shops...
Anything you want up to $20.
A class reunion for Ruby Wax and Pamela Anderson. Tonight at 10:10 on BBC1.
Who's more attractive, me or her? I'm more attractive. Well, there you go.
You know, that's cute.
In the 30s, they were having a ball.
You could have a great fun as a battered girl, which I did.
I remember one night going to 2 balls and one night actually going to 3.
But the party was about to end.
It didn't occur to us that it wouldn't go on forever.
The continuing story of the aristocracy. Wednesday at 9 on BBC2.
Now on BBC1 Panorama, Sarah Powell investigates recent controversial research on working mothers.
life in Britain is changing.